So welcome to this introductory course to the course Architectonics from the Mind, Architecture and its Cognition. This first course is a very, very brief introduction to what we're going to talk about along the semester. So as a lightweight introduction, we're going to start to talk about two crises very briefly. Which are joining together a common period, which is important in computer science, in cognitive science, and architecture. We're going to be bridging some bodies of knowledge. Some we know, some we don't. And yes, they ask the same questions from completely different perspectives and sometimes overlapping. So while we are doing that, we can ask ourselves, how come looking at the same thing from different perspectives can bring out different knowledge and meaning? So we're gonna keep poking at this question along the semester and the course, and we're gonna see what comes out of this. So first, a few words about myself for who did not attend in person the introductory course. So my name is Pierre Cutellic. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at ETH, and I'm also a trained architect and a visual artist. But I am not a historian or a theoretician. This is important to tell you that, because this is not a full-blown theory course where we will be dissecting certain periods precisely in the history of architecture in great details. What we will do instead is rather observe these moments and the positions taken and try to compare them with neighboring ones to build up a sort of contemporary position about it that is critical. And to do that, we need to get the gist of the ideas and discuss them. So hopefully this will help you also to scheme a mental map of these ideas in architecture and furnish some of the arguments along other courses you might take for building up your own professional vocabulary later on. So, to bridge those two important moments in the history of ideas, I would like to first show you two things, a book and a painting. So in a seminal book written by the French post-structuralist philosopher Michel Foucault in 1966, so second half of the 20th century, he argues for the obsolescence of what was called the naturalization of centralities in modern scientific thinking. It was truly a very important piece of work and a very important idea, comparable to a Copernican revolution for him. The way that it would just completely turn around the way we would understand the world around us and our way to think about it. He was arguing that the natural centers of the time, which were represented by the sun, for example, to organize the cosmos, or the man to understand societies, and so on, would not be relevant anymore. From his point of view, meaning then would have to be thought anew from multiplicities and dimensionalities of the world, not a single point, not a single center, but many at once. A new order of things, if you prefer. That is also the title of the book in English, if you would like to look for it. And on the left, the baroque painting, the very famous masterpiece from Diego Velázquez in the 17th century called Las Meninas, which is a superposition of modes of picturing the relationship between the viewer, the painting itself, and the world in an all-encompassing fashion. You can see now the links between those two, even though they were done at two different periods of time, they belong to the same body of knowledge, the same way to think on how to handle multiplicity, uncertainty, kaleidoscopic perspectives, let's say, in a single synthetic fashion in order to draw out sense of it. So this painting is not only a baroque masterpiece, but also a powerful metaphor for what we might expect from heavy human production that reaches a certain level of abstraction, such as this painting. It's a general capacity to articulate sense. And this is also what Michel Foucault was advocating for, to move forward in this new era. What I believe is that similarly, architects ought to reframe the contemporary conditions of what is articulable digitally nowadays in order to draw sense out of it. But the problem is that one has to deal with the complexity of the current world. And also to draw sense out of it, of course, but where does this sense come from? And what is its value? To give you a bit more of immediate contemporary context, let's say, for architecture, there is one particular emblematic moment in the late 20th century in architectural discourses, which were regarding the so-called symbolic crisis. So Robert Venturi and his associates, Dennis Scott Brown, Stephen Mizano, is seen as an important architect and theoretician of the 20th century in theorizing the way architecture could convey meaning. Two of his most famous books are Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture, he wrote in 1966, and Learning from Las Vegas in 1972, from which this picture is extracted. So both are significant work for the second half of the 20th century. And so this image is a famous photo from that work where he is contemplating the evolution of informational displays against architectural elements in the urban landscape of Las Vegas. And while the work is consequent for the crisis of modernity at that time, it can also be read as a rather passive and analytic approach of urban manifestations from a rather ambient informational phenomena, where signs and symbols were starting to overflow the urban fabric. And the directions it suggested were for many to rethink architecture now, after the digital, as a necessity to survive among signs and symbols rather than the capacity of architecture in articulating it anymore. And in parallel to Venturi's revelation of this information age and its consequences on both built environment and modern ideologies, there was this then promising field of artificial intelligence, which fell into an ice age for almost a decade. So you can see here in this graphic, in red, there is written the XOR problem at the end of the 60s. So what happened is that researchers were facing the very problem of not being able to realize their own ambitions, both conceptually and technically. The great initial excitement of both researchers and founders brought about by the development of neural nets, for example, was interrupted by the computer scientist Marvin Minsky and his colleague Seymour Papert in 1969 with the book Perceptrons, which revealed important limitations on what and how a machine, as one could be conceived at that time, could actually learn. So most of the barriers encountered were directly related to the challenge of processing vast quantities of data. Problems such as memory or processing speed and the necessity of having data sets to learn from were all linked to learn from, were all linked to the same issue of acquiring and processing a constantly increasing amount of data. So, of course, most of these issues were overcome in the 80s by new generations of computers, models, and methods for neural nets, such as what was known as neocognition or backpropagation. And it went on to more and more sophisticated mechanisms for that. But these developments remained intimately linked and limited by the ability to process and evaluate increasingly larger data sets. And it's a symptomatic form of this phenomena, which can be seen in the overwhelming communication system described by Venturi, Scott Brown, and Izeno as Las Vegas architecture and urbanism. Or we could also reformulate it as a rise of communication and information over space. So the then symbolic crisis they addressed was one of the earliest symptoms of a general crisis of knowledge impairment. Las Vegas served as a tangible proof that with the evolution of human activities, communication would come to dominate space in a rather ambient manner, conveying increasingly vast quantities of data from which the production of knowledge would become equally increasingly difficult. The Las Vegas citizen's car became essential to navigate through the symbolic and sign systems made for high-speed recognition, and both rendered the unmediated person impaired to experience and understand his immediate surroundings. So from there, we can see that new ways to navigate amongst information in the physical space would have to be sought. And also that a form of spatial alienation by lack of mediation became the pervasive architectural paradox of Las Vegas. So what was already obvious then has almost no exception now, wherever we look in every city. This is now a current view of Las Vegas with the new gigantic sphere-led building, which is a display surface that oversees a very large part of the city. When you see that, it's obvious that if we look back now, architecture did not stand a chance in front of such an overwhelming force to articulate information in space. Another point, Nicola Negroponte, also an architect and founder of the Architecture Machine Group at MIT and the Media Lab, published two books at around the same time, called The Architecture Machine in 70 and Soft Architecture Machines in 75. Here you also see an example of one of the projects he developed with his researchers over there, which is very similar to the perspective offered by Venturi throughout the Car's view. To the difference that here it's a reconstructed view through digital technologies. And what Negroponte did with this work is that he laid out an anticipatory plan to technological advancements and a synthetic approach for architecture, embracing digital technologies. One of the many critical aspects of this work has been to highlight the same ethical and ontological issues faced by AI research, which is the discrimination between artificial and natural cognition. But within these two works, one could see that there was also a progressive roadmap being drawn for a collaborative environment between humans and machines, where the discrimination of one cognitive system would not necessarily substitute the other to navigate among the flows of information. So there were a variety of approaches and viewpoints regarding these particular issues. Some were more technology-oriented and more proactive, some were more passive. But in other terms, the symbolic crisis in architecture and the one faced in computer science at the same time during the second half of the 20th century were essentially asking the same question from different perspectives, but went on their own way. If you want to see another aspect of this context, you can listen to this video from Peter Eisenman, who is an American architect and critic linked to the idea of deconstructivism in architecture in the 20th century. And he described this moment as the time when the kind of structure or grammar architects had to organize their thinking and building would eventually give way to rhetoric and a plethora of points from where telling a story with buildings in order to intend to articulate again this information would be the only way out. And so this is from that particular period, and what reticulates from there that the course will unfold. Guest speaker will present their own perspectives from various points and bodies of knowledge, and we will try to think again on how can we think about architecture and its cognition after the information age. I'm leaving here a QR code if you want to see the YouTube video about Eisenman on grammar and rhetoric. And I will see you next week for the next lecture. Thank you.